Okay, good afternoon. Welcome for today's discussion. We're going to talk about employee relations in the HR's perspective. But before that, let me uh, give you a brief summary on what we have discussed last meeting. So we're actually done with the labor relations, no, wherein we discuss uh, just and valid causes, procedural due process, and all other things no, in related to labor relations. So we already covered up everything no, on our subjects on labor law. And for today's topic, this is actually uh, information that would apply in your practice as HR, wherein employee relations can be used no, or can be applied. Okay, so as I've said, it is very important for you to really determine if, especially in termination, that the cause is valid and just, no? And of course, aside from that, it should follow the procedure on how to terminate so not to be to face lawsuits on illegal dismissal. Okay, uh, so to start with, employee relation ensures that employee rights are protected and that local laws and regulations are applied to all employees, processes employee grievances and investigates relevant incident, and policy of encouraging employees to come to higher management with any concern. So in other words, all issues related to the relationship between the employee and the employer, that is what employee relations is, no? So if there are complaints, disputes, or grievances, the employee should raise it to the employer, and of course, the employer must investigate uh, on the complaints or the incidents reported to HR, no, or to the employer in as HR as the representative. Okay, and it is also talks about the policies of the employer, and to promote good relationship, there should be a policy which encourage employees to come to higher management. So there are actually the Department of Labor and Employment, for those companies who don't have labor unions, they encourage to have a labor management council. So those are not registered associations or groups, but it is an initiative by the employer wherein there are representatives from employees, no, or rank and files, in order to communicate easily with them, no. So, like for example, if there are decisions that the management will do, no, so they will coordinate first with the representatives through the labor management council. Okay, so that's the purpose of employee relations. Now there are 5 key dimensions of employee relations, no. So in order to have good employee relations, the following must uh, is a must, no, or should that the company should have. Okay, first is there should be an employee involvement, especially in terms of decision making or policy making, especially involving the relations, no, between the employee and that would affect the employees. So employees should be involved. And then another important dimension is employee communication. So again, uh, especially those policies affecting the rights of the employees, it should be communicated to them as well, no? And then in cases of problems or issues uh, with regards to employees' performance, there should be employee counseling. Okay, and also employee discipline So in cases there will be incidences or situation, it should be dealt with. I mean, like for example, if there will be disciplinary sanctions. So if employees, especially those employees who are really not doing well, no, or not doing good in their performance, or like for example, specific example is problems in attendance. So if it's already habitual, then there should be a corresponding sanction. Of course, in order to do that, there should be a proper employee discipline program. Okay, and lastly, employee rights. So as the employer, in order to have good relationship with the employee, their rights as employees should be respected. Okay, so these are the 5 key dimensions of employee relations. Now, we've mentioned on employee communication, which is again very important also, no? Since, like for example, if the employer through HR will implement a policy in order to avoid complaints, problems later on, there should be a proper communication uh, towards the employees, no? So the communication could be downward or upward, no? So let's discuss first with downward communication system. So when you say downward communication, it is the flow of information and messages from a higher level inside an organization to a lower one. So effective downward communication is crucial to an organization's success. So as this one, this is from the top, no, from management to rank and file employees. So specific example of these are like policy enforcement. Like for example, if there will be changes in terms, or there are policies that you need to enforce, of course you cannot enforce easily without telling the employees, no? So they should be informed first. Okay, so you can use either of these examples. So like if you have inter-office memorandum, you need to disseminate it, either sending them a copy per department, or you can post the memorandum to the employee bulletins, no? So there should be a respective employee bulletins where the employees can read on whatever communication they need to know, no? And then if your company has an in-house publications, you can also use that, or electronic communication. So again, it would depend on on how the company communicates to their employees, no? But again, very important is there should be a constant communication to employees. And then we also have upward communication system. This is the process by which lower level company employees can directly communicate with upper management to provide feedback, complaints, or suggestion regarding the day-to-day operations of the company. So opposite with the downward communication, upward communication is from the employees to management. So example of this one is the performance report. So in cases of annual performance report, no, and then the employee has questions. The employee have questions on the output or the result of his performance evaluation. Then the employee then can actually direct his concern or ask the manager or the immediate superior who evaluated the concerned employee, on the criteria or any questions related to his performance result, uh, which he can raise, no, to his immediate superior. Another example of upward communication are suggestion boxes, wherein employees are encouraged to uh, voice out, no, or give suggestions for improvement of system or whatever within the company. And also employee satisfaction surveys. So these are systems that will encourage, no, for the upward communication systems. Okay, And then counseling functions. Uh, Again, to avoid labor disputes or cases. So that is actually the worst thing to happen, no? But actually, as HR, we can prevent that to happen. So the following counseling functions are very vital, no? So as HR, uh, whether you initiate or uh, recommend a training for those managers who handles subordinates or with supervisory functions, they should be well thought, no, on these different counseling functions, because before the problem will will become worse. So it should be avoided, no, or it should be prevented. Okay, so example, before an employee would file a case against the company for illegal dismissal. So that's the worst thing to happen. But before that, uh, bef- uh, again, as HR, we would like to avoid that, no? That is why it is very vital for the managers or superiors to really do their part, no? Okay, so first thing, first counseling function is advice. So counselors often give advice to those being counseled in order to guide them toward desired courses of actions. So especially if you have employees who have personal problems or probably um, issues that affects his performance, no? So counseling can be done through giving advice. So with this, when you advise your subordinates, they could also feel that you have uh, you value them, no, and then you are concerned with them. So with your advice, then it would avoid bigger problem to happen. And then second is reassurance. So the counseling experience often provides employees with reassurance, which is the confidence that they are following a suitable course of action and have the courage to try it. Okay, so after the initial counseling, for example, wherein you give advice, so another function to support that one is reassurance. So you need to assure the employees that if they will follow whatever you agreed, so it would be best for them, no, and again it will encourage them. And third is communication. So counseling is a communication experience. It initiates upward communication to management and also gives the counselor an opportunity to provide insights to employees. Again, of course, when you do counseling, there's always communication, or and again, it should be, the message should be clear, no? So most often this in counseling, it would really, especially, it would depend on the problem of the employee, no? So it would really take time, okay? And then next is release of emotional tension. So people tend to get emotional release when they have an opportunity to discuss their problems with someone else. Okay, so expect this one, especially you have an employee who really have problems, no? Okay, so when this happen, listening would be helpful. Okay, so let them express their feelings, listen to their problems. So that's how you do counseling, no? Clarified thinking. So serious discussion of problems with someone else helps a person to think more clearly about this problem. Based on my experience, there are actually employees, no, or most of the employees, they are not aware of or the root cause of their problem, or even they even know doesn't know what is really their problem is. Okay, so they really need guidance. But in counseling, 80% of the talking should be done by the employee, no? And the superior must probably around 20% lang. So you listen as the superior, most of the time you listen, and then you guide the employee in order to identify his or her problem. Okay, so it shouldn't be you telling the employee what to do, or uh, giving your ideas, no, but it should come from the employee himself or herself, no. So let the employee discover his or her own problem, and of course, if there's a problem, there should be a solution. Okay, and of course, solution must come from the employees themselves, no, since especially like problems like tardiness. Okay, so it is actually a very personal problem, so uh, you cannot tell the employee what to do, what time to wake up, but ask them instead, what are you going to do in order to avoid that problem? What can you do? Okay, so not the superior uh, idea or recommendations, no? But again, the point there is let the employee knows his problem and think of uh, possible solutions to on his own problem, no? Okay, and then reorientation. So reorientation involves a change in an employee's basic self through a change in goals and values. So deeper counseling of the type practiced by psychologists and psychiatrists often helps employees reorient values. So this one example, if there's really a negative value, no, or values, so it would really require a big, I mean, kumbaga big job, no, or a big work to do, long process, and for this kind of situation, it would be best that psychologists or psychiatrists will be the one doing the reorientation. Okay, then for discipline, this is actually a management action to encourage compliance with the organization standards, no? So to to have a harmonious relationship or a peaceful and working environment, discipline must be done, no? I mean, must be practiced by all employees. So in cases there will be employees who need to be disciplined, then you should have a uh, policies on hand, no? Or an established policy to address those employees that need to be disciplined. Okay. Then another one, we also have this preventive discipline. So these are action taken prior to any infraction to encourage employees to follow the rules so infractions are prevented. Okay, so not all faults or wrong should be given directly. I mean, would be automatic for you to penalize the employee, no? But as the immediate superior, it's up to you on how you handle your employee, So others practice preventive discipline. So before uh, the problem or the problem will become big, so you should have a policies or procedure on how to prevent those employees, no? Okay, so for example, before the employee will be sanctioned for violate a particular rules of the company, then you need to do something, no? So one example can be constant reminder or meeting and discuss all those things to remind the employees. So that is an example of preventive discipline. Then we also have corrective discipline. So these are action that follows a rule infraction and seeks to discourage further infractions. So this means that in order to avoid repeat violation, then the action must be corrected, no? That is why you penalize the employee to remind the employee not to do the violation again, okay, or the infraction again. Okay, so that is how you discourage a negative action from the employees, no? So that is corrective discipline. And of course, we already discussed this. Due process, established rules and procedures for disciplinary action are followed and employees have an opportunity to respond the charges. Okay, so again, each company should have the, your rules and regulations or the process on how to address these things, no, or how to enforce due process. So each company actually they have different processes, no, but again it depends on the company on how to do it as long as due process are being complied. Then we also have this principle called hot stove rule, no? So this is disciplinary action should be like touching a hot stove with warning, immediate, consistent, and impersonal. So like a feeling wherein if you touch the stove, which is hot, of course, what you're going to feel is, since it's hot, then you try to not to touch it again. Okay, so the feeling that you were burned is actually the same when you are being sanctioned or being penalized because of the fault you have done, no? So that is how you implement this hot stove rule. So other employees, for example, are being suspended because of a major violation committed, no? So the suspension there stands as the burned in a hot stove principle. So the employee will not repeat that violation again. Okay, or not to commit that sanction or I mean infraction again, no? Then the other company, and of course this one is this is for me as HR, I would recommend this kind of system, no, in implementing discipline in the company, the progressive discipline. So this is a type of discipline whereby there are stronger penalties for repeated offenses. Okay, so example of progressive discipline, this is actually a step-by-step process, no? Example of this one is for violation of absent. For example, if you were absent first time, unauthorized, then you will be penalized probably of verbal warning first. And then on the second time around, if you still go on absent without authority or an excuse, then probably on the second time, it will now be written warning, no? Then on the third, you will now be suspended for 3 days, 1 day. It depends on your company rule, no? So that is an example of a progressive discipline. Now we also have this positive discipline, no? It focuses on the specific problem rather than the employee's attitude or personality. So gain agreement with the employee that a performance problem exists and that the employee is responsible for changing his or her behavior. So approach discipline as a problem-solving process. So this is what I've meant, no? Na when you when you do counseling, for example, and then since there is a problem with regards to uh, employee's attitude or performance, then let the employee uh, with your guidance, of course, or with the superior's guidance, let the employee discover his problem, and by his own idea on how he would address his problem and find a solution. No? So what are the things that he need to do in order to change his behavior or his performance? So that is an example of a positive discipline. So document suggested changes or commitments by the employee. So when you do counseling, so you need to document everything, no? Like as HR, as I've said, documentation is very important. Okay, so when you do counseling, I would recommend really to write it up, document it, so that you have records, no? So in cases the employee doesn't uh, comply with his promise or whatever you agreed that he's going to do, so at least you have your record. Okay, and then follow up to ensure that the employee is living up to his or her commitments and to reduce the likelihood of having to take more severe action. Okay, so after your counseling, after your talk, so you need to follow up also, no, that the employee really did not forget his promise or commitment. Okay. What about wrongful dismissal? This is a dismissal without just cause or reasonable notice of termination. Okay, so it is, in other words, it is illegal dismissal if you don't follow what is provided by law, which is you only terminate an employee if you have just and valid cause, and of course you follow the due process or the procedural due process. Non-compliance of either of the two would, especially both of those processes, will result to wrongful dismissal or illegal dismissal. And of course, you will really have a very big problem if you have wrongful dismissal. So, what about the requirements in dismissing an incompetent employee? So, incompetent would be low performance, no? Or the employee cannot do what is expected of him by the company. So you need to have a reasonable and objective performance standard. It is the employer's responsibility to show that this standard has been effectively communicated to employees and that other employees have achieved the standard. So what this means is, if for example an employee is not doing well, no, or has very poor performance, you cannot easily terminate an employee because you just say that he's not doing good or he's not following instructions or whatever, so it should be documented, and there should be a process, and the right thing or the right process is before the employee or during the orientation, the first day of the employee's employment, the employee, again, orientation is very important, no? And during the orientation, the standards or the criteria wherein the employee's performance will be based should be discussed during the orientation. So what are the performance standards of the company? The employee should be informed, no? And again, you should have a proof that the employee was really oriented or was informed on the performance standards, okay? So that is one requirement. The employee should be informed on the company's performance standard. And then document employee's performance, indicating what he or she has failed to meet the standards, so while other employees have been successful. Like, for example, we have probationary, which is 6 months, no? So depending on the company policy, some companies would have 2 evaluations during probationary period. Example of that is probably the first evaluation will be done after 3 months, no, from day one, and the final evaluation will be done on the 5th month. Okay, So during the first evaluation, it should be documented, no? And this the result or the evaluation must be discussed to the employees. Now, in case employee fails on the first evaluation, however, the superior recommend to continue the employment up to fifth month, no, or on the second evaluation. Okay, so again, everything must be documented, no, and during the first evaluation, the employee should be informed on what are those things that he need to improve, or is there any problem coaching or training or whatever, so there should be counseling at the same time coaching, no, especially if the problem there is probably training, no. Okay, now during evaluation, if that is the case, no, wherein you have two evaluations, actually if the employee fails the first evaluation, the question there is it necessary that the employee needs to finish the probationary period, or what if the employee's performance is really very bad, no, and you think that as the superior of the employee, you can do nothing about it, and you are really not satisfied on his performance. Now, question there, can you terminate the employment of the probationary employee even on his first evaluation? Actually, you can do that, no? If you really find that the employee will not improve despite training or whatever, so you can terminate as long as, again, you give a notice of decision or notice of termination. Okay? Question, are you going to give notice to explain to the employee? It is not necessary. I mean, it's no longer, ano, no? You can go away with notice to explain because in the first place, during the orientation, the employee was already informed on the process. So again, as a reminder, it should be very important that the policies should be communicated to the employee, no? Now, going back to the example, again, you can actually terminate the employment even on the third month, no? It is not necessary that you need to finish the probationary period before you can end. Okay, but again, it's up to the superior if he or I mean if the superior will give the employee a chance to improve, no, and wait until the final evaluation. Okay, so but again, you can terminate early as long as you discuss it during the orientation with the employee, and of course, you serve a notice of termination. And question again, do we need to follow a 30-day notice, or should be the employee should be informed that his employment will be terminated after 30 days? No, it is not necessary to it is not necessary to do that, since you already informed the employee. Once you serve the notice of termination, you can actually write it in your termination letter, no, that the employee will be terminated upon receipt. So again, depending on what day you serve the notice of termination, and that will be effective once the notice will be received by the employee. And then document employee's performance, indicating that he or she has failed to meet the standards while other employees have been successful. Again, documentation is very important. So you need to let the employee sign, acknowledge the evaluation signed by the superior, and what are the recommendations should be written down, no, on the evaluation form. And have evidence of warnings given to the employee. Show that appropriate training, support, time, and feedback have been provided to the employee to enable the employee to learn the task. So in cases performance failure because of lack of training or support, then you need to document or to show, to present that you've already done those things. So by the time that the employee will really be terminated, you have proof, no, or evidences that you did your best as the immediate superior to help the employee improve, but still the employee's performance is unsatisfactory. Okay, and then demonstrate that the employee concerned had reasonable time to improve performance. So we've discussed this already, the procedural process, due process, commonly called as twin notice requirement because there are two notices. The first one is the show cause memo or the notice to explain. And then the second notice is the notice of termination. But prior to that, a hearing must be conducted, especially if there's no admittance in the explanation of the employee. Okay, so that's the twin notice requirement. So for the first written notice, what are the things that you need to include, no? So it should contain specific causes or grounds for termination. So what are the violations, no? I mean, yeah, what are the violations committed based on the company rules and regulation, the actual offense or the actual incident wherein you can say that because of that incident, the employee was uh, possibly violated, no? Since again, when you write the notice to explain, it should be all allegations, possibly. So you should not be. I mean, it should not be. Uh, should not be judgmental, no? Baga, you need to. It should be considered as all allegations since you need to investigate and all, no? So it should not be what do you call that? Conclusive. Okay, so purely it should be allegations, no? So possible or use those words that uh, not conclusive words, no? Okay, so again, it should contain the specific causes or grounds. So whatever your policies are, so you write it in your note, include it in your first written notice, which is the notice to explain. And then it should contain a directive that the employee is given the opportunity to submit his written explanation within the reasonable period of 5 calendar days from receipt. So why 5 days? This since this is based on the Supreme Court decision, this is most reasonable time, no, wherein the employee can explain. But as I mentioned with our previous discussion, it depends on the actual situation of the employee, no? The example I gave last time is what if the employee is in coma, no, because of a vehicular accident, for example, and then the employee is in coma for 1 month. So this one will not apply, no? Okay, but normally, as a general rule, you need to let the employee explain within 5 days. Now, the question is, are you going to wait uh, 5 days before you schedule the hearing? Actually, this one, you should write it in the notice to explain. But if the employee submitted his explanation letter after 2 days, for example, or even after a day, you can actually schedule right after, the administrative hearing. Okay, so because the reason for these 5 days is for the employee to have ample opportunity to explain his side, no? To think what to write in his explanation letter. Okay? So that's 5 calendar days. Now, what if you don't follow 5 days? Like, for example, in your notice to explain, as your company rule, you only give 48 hours for the employee to explain, and then later the decision is termination. That would result to a problem later on, no? That will be questioned by the arbiter, no, or the judge, since 48 hours is not an ample opportunity. So you need to follow the 5 calendar days. This is a must, no? That's the standard days to be given to employees in cases of uh, in conformance to due process. And then contain a detailed narration of the facts and circumstances. So aside from the violation, like for example, it's a minor or major offense, yeah, then you need to also include in the notice to explain the detailed narration. So what happened, no? What are the facts? Why the employee committed that violation? Mention what company rules, if any, are violated and or which among the grounds under Article 282 is being charged against the employee. So actually that Article 282 is the just and valid causes, no? So like for example, if it is a gross negligence, especially if the company rule violated is on tardiness, and then the employee already committed tardiness for 10 times. So that constitute habitual, that's gross negligence, no? So again, you need to explain that or to write that in the notice to explain. So again, why 5 calendar days? Again, to enable him to prepare adequately for his defense, to study the accusation against him, to consult a union official or lawyer, to gather data and evidence, and to decide on the defenses he will raise against the complaint. So these are the reasons why you need to give the employee 5 days to explain. Hearing required if employee is given an opportunity to explain and clarify his defenses to the charges against him. Okay, so aside from the written explanation the employee submitted, then a hearing must also be done, especially if there's no admittance, to further discuss, no, and explain the employee's side, to meet the witnesses or to know the charges, no, thoroughly, which will be discussed during the hearing, no? And also this is also the opportunity for the employee to present evidence in support of his defenses, and of course rebut the evidence presented against him by the management. Okay. For the second written notice, all circumstances involving the charges against the employee have been considered. So in your decision, this one must be uh, included, no? So why came up such decision based on those circumstances? You need to write that, no? And of course, the grounds that you established to justify the severance of his employment. So these are the things that you need to include in your second written notice, which is the notice of decision. Okay, so we'll end our discussion on this slide. So we'll continue our discussion next meeting on the standard situation in termination cases. Okay, again, if you have questions, just PM me directly so that I can answer your questions right away, or send your question to our class Bidal so that you could send it to me and again answer those questions. No? Okay, so again, always take note of your questions, no? When you start watching this discussion so that you can raise it up in our group chat. Okay, so that ends our discussion for today. So enjoy the rest of the day.